Like, even again, my friend on TikTok earlier, she was like, I can't believe how strong of a teenager you were. And I didn't feel that way at all. I just felt like I was falling apart. But from the outside looking in, yeah, nobody could really tell.
Every parent's fear is, how is that toxic relationship impacting our children? Well, to answer that question today, I'm being joined by Nia Renee. She is not only a relationship coach and author, but she's also survived abuse as well as 6 brain surgeries. I'm very excited to introduce to you today Nia Renee. I've known Nia for a while. She's not only a fellow content creator, somebody in the narcissistic abuse circle, but she's also a friend of mine. So I'm very excited to be able to talk with her. One of the things, Nia, that you come out right away from the top, letting the world know, is that you've survived and overcome child abuse. Why don't you give a little bit of picture of what that was like for you?
Yeah. Hi, Kerry. First of all, hi. I'm so happy to be here. I just love you so much, Kerry. So much. So I just wanted to give you flowers on your own platform. Everything you're doing is amazing. And yes, we have been friends, coworkers, peers for a few years now. So yeah, my child abuse started from what I can remember at the age of 4. I grew up in a very chaotic household, a very toxic household. I didn't have a safe space. My mother was very abusive. My siblings were very abusive. And every aspect of the word. I endured sexual abuse as a child by both of my siblings. My mother was physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically abusive. My dad had narcissistic tendencies. So I just grew up in a very chaotic household, and it just blossomed into just being my whole entire life.
Now, I know that obviously you knew that some of that is abuse, but maybe you didn't know all of it is abuse. Did you know something was wrong growing up, that this is not normal?
Yes, I always felt like something was off. I've always felt like things weren't normal. I always felt like something was wrong here. And that was something that I leaned into and I trusted. And I was always a kid that just always asked questions. I was always talking. And that kind of got me in trouble a little bit, especially when it came to my mother, because obviously your abuser doesn't want you to talk about the things that are going on behind closed doors. So I had to be quiet essentially. I had to find a way to not. But it eventually got to a point where I leaned in and started having conversations with my dad and asking him questions and telling him about what was going on. But yes, I always felt like something was wrong.
How do you think it's affected relationships outside of the family? Did you see it like showing up in friendships and even when you were dating as a younger person?
Yes, I realized that almost all of my relationships in some type of way were toxic, abusive, people just really taking from me. And yeah, every relationship, it affected every single relationship I've ever had.
So give me a for instance of how you saw it happen.
So now that, I'm 31 years old now and hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
And so realizing that even down to my first boyfriend and realizing in high school, I was groomed by a 17-year-old turning 18 and the high school football player. And I wanted to be loved so badly because I wasn't getting it at home that I didn't realize that I was stepping into toxic realms and like when I go back to saying like I didn't have a safe space, like going to school wasn't safe for me either. My uncle worked for my high school
Oh,
and my uncle is one of my biggest abusers, my mom's
yeah.
brother. So I just didn't have a safe space anywhere that I went, especially at school. So it was just incredibly difficult. But I'm just now realizing at 31 that my first relationship was abusive in so many different ways, including sexually abusive.
Isn't that amazing how we look back and we suddenly realize or at least see it's like it's not only just hindsight, it's more than that. I think there's a level, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the terminology from Jennifer Freed called betrayal blindness, where we literally
Hmm.
can't see
Yeah.
what's in front of us. And we know it's not normal, but we don't know to the depth that it's not normal.
Right.
What was one of the things that you came to a realization with is like, this was really messed up?
I mean, I laugh because it's so many things. I think I realized when I was in 8th grade, I didn't know at the time it was a smear campaign, but I knew my mom going on a smear campaign while she was married to my dad. I knew something was off with that, like that just wasn't right. And I knew that she was trying to manipulate me and she was trying to poison my mind and my view of my dad. And instead of being quiet, I just started asking my dad questions because I was just really confused. And I was only seeing her perspective, and her perspective was always chaotic. It
Mhm.
didn't make sense. It was always extreme emotions, and I didn't trust it. And so I
Right.
just started opening up to my dad.
We don't talk about it at all, but I think children experience cognitive dissonance, not just romantic partners. I think children realize there's this dual reality and they can't tell exactly what's true, but they essentially feel something is off or wrong. What do you think of that idea?
Absolutely. I lived it. I lived
Mm.
it for a very long time. I lived it for my entire childhood. And even in the moments where I was confiding in my dad and I was still growing up and going through high school and I was dealing with the cognitive dissonance at the same time, I was definitely living in a dual reality while trying to mature into a woman. I was literally going through puberty and changing into a woman. And I had to put on a mask of who I was. And in private, I could be emotional or confused and not really understanding. But in public, I had to put on this face like I was just a regular high school girl or just a regular middle schooler. And I was just, going through the steps when really I was a child who was troubled trying to figure out that I didn't know that I was being abused. I didn't know to what level. And it was always so watered down and it was never really addressed or talked about. But like I said, now that I'm 31, looking at hindsight, like I was such a troubled young person growing up trying to figure out how to navigate trauma, but not knowing that I was navigating trauma.
And when you said even that your uncle was at the school, so
Hmm.
here multiple settings are not safe.
Yes.
You're having to create a curated vision of here's Nia Renee, the happy little girl going to school. Everything's okay. When actually it's not. And you're probably terrified, I imagine, or at least constantly stressed and anxious.
Yes. Actually, I was on TikTok live earlier today, and one of my high school friends was in the comments and she was commenting back and forth. And she was like, yeah, I just always thought you were just kind of quiet and reserved. And like you just, you were quiet and you were standing on business because you were an athlete. And so that's what you were focused on. So, because my nickname in high school was Ghost, nobody ever saw me unless we had class together or they saw me at a sporting event because my safe haven was in the athletic office with someone who was like my at school mom. A lot of people thought that I was weird and many people couldn't connect with it. Like nobody knew what was going on except obviously like there were adult figures in my life that knew what was going on, but it was at such a high level like vice principals and principals and deans and teachers and coaches knew what was going on, but none of the students knew what was going on unless we played sports together. And even if we played sports together, there was only a select few people that I felt like I could truly confide in, but I
Mhm.
still didn't know that what I was dealing with was not normal.
I had some of the same realizations. In fact, I did a similar thing that you did. I hung out in the Spanish class. Whenever I get done eating, or sometimes even eat lunch in Spanish. So I would just congregate at every free space I had. I go to Spanish class. I don't even think the teacher liked me, by the way, even though I took Spanish with her for 4 years. I didn't care. It was a
Yeah.
place where I could just be there, be myself, not have to deal
Hmm.
with the larger context, is my safety. And here's the thing I bet. I bet you from the outside, nobody could tell.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those situations where, like, even again, my friend on TikTok earlier, she was like, I can't believe how strong of a teenager you were. And I didn't feel that way at all. I just felt like I was falling apart. But from the outside looking in, yeah, nobody could really tell. They just thought I was just like this kid that just was kind of weird. And I just was really awkward in human interaction
Right.
situations. And I so desperately wanted to have emotional connections and attachments with other people. So sometimes that would come off really weird. And so, but yeah, I mean, I was just an athlete that was just focused on being athletic. And that's how people saw me.
Yeah, and I know that when I was going through training in psychology, working with kids, that we would say one of the big hallmarks of difficulties when you see a child not doing well in multiple settings, like, for example, home, friends' houses, school, maybe they're involved with church or something else, that you'd see this pattern of problematic behavior in multiple sites. What's interesting is, and it was true for me too, there was no such pattern. I was doing fine everywhere. I looked good. I looked like everything was going great for me. Meanwhile, on the inside, I was an absolute mess, feeling that I was trying to hold it together. I was actually very anxious and I was trying to hold it together. Was that the case? Were you doing something similar?
Yes, I was doing that. I would act out a little bit, but I would only be in ways of like when I'm getting attention from boys. But I was definitely normal in every situation. But inside, I don't think I've ever said this publicly. And I also don't talk about it much. But I was raped in high school and I never had any mental health help, right? But I did struggle with a lot of anxiety to the point where it manifested in an OCD reaction. And for like 2 years straight, I would do and if I didn't do that noise the right way, I'd have to keep doing it. So my anxiety manifested in that way. And it was just definitely showing in other ways that just
Right.
weren't really like addressed or talked about. But that's like the first time I've actually like I just actually told my husband that for the very first time a couple of months ago. And I'm back in psychotherapy again. I'm doing EMDR again. I'm even doing I forgot the other one. It's not
Is
it's
it brain spotting?
Yes, brain spotting, thank you. So I'm doing both of those again, and so I'm just realizing I'm going I'm realizing a lot, and healing is a journey, not a destination, so
Right.
I'm back on that part of the journey where I want to address more of my trauma. So my anxiety definitely manifested in so many different ways. When I was in college, people would ask me why, like, I do this with my wrists a lot, and I still do it,
I
like,
have
now.
seen you do it. I do
Yeah,
know that you do
and
that.
it's if my wrists don't pop a certain way, like, I have to do it until my wrist pop a certain
Interesting.
way. I would pull out my sports bra. I would pull my sports bra down. It
I've
would
seen you do
no
that
yeah.
too.
It has manifested in so many different ways, and
That's fascinating.
it's decreased, over the years, but we were, like, playing, like, a truth or dare type game or something like that when I was in college, and some of the girls that didn't like me, they're like, "Why do you always do that with your wrists?" Or like, "Why do you always pull your bra?" And I didn't notice that I did that. So, yeah, I was more aware of it after that, but, yeah,
Right.
it's
Right.
manifested in so many different ways.
Yeah, I have OCD symptoms as well. And one of mine issue, and it's popped, now you're getting me to think too, because popped me back up again a little bit, is I get obsessed about time. And in
Mhm.
college, I scheduled my daily schedule to 15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And I did that for years. Even when I first got into my marriage with Brett, I
Mhm.
would continue to have myself on a 15-minute schedule and I'd get panicked over open space. I'd want to
Mm.
know what the plan was constantly and
Yeah.
literally would want things to move from one thing to the next thing and get anxious in the in between time. And if you think about it this way, it's a way to maintain control.
Yeah,
When
like
you,
a coping mechanism.
yes, when you're feeling like your whole life is out of control, you're going to look for control wherever you can find it. And for me, it was in time. For you, is the things you can control about your body and yourself and your movement. It's so fascinating. So I want to jump into, did you start to see it manifest into more romantic relationships and how did that happen?
Well, so before you actually get to that, there's something else that I want to tell you too that I've
Okay.
never said publicly back after my sexual assault, because that really kind of triggered a lot of my underlying situations. I ended up having to see a therapist. I had to go through the whole court process, and I thought I had a personality disorder. I thought I had multiple personalities because there were just chunks of time that I wouldn't remember. And my dad or my friends would tell me, like, I lost my wallet one time and I drove my friend's car to the gas station, something, whatever. But one day, I went into my dad's bathroom. My dad and I were living together at this point, and our dogs, he said, was so weird because Bandit was his name, was barking at us, and he never really did. And he said the way that I was talking, it sounded like I was like a little girl, but like, and I was like wounded and scared. And it was weird too because my dad took me to get my belly pierced, and he said that I don't know, it was something strange, but it happened a few times to where, like, I even did, like, a presentation in high school where it's like, "Well, I have multiple personalities, I guess." And when I talked with my therapist, they said it was just a way that I was coping at the time with all of the trauma that I was dealing with, and when things got so severe, I would just block things out. It's like, so I don't have multiple personalities. Like,
Right.
it manifested in one of my romantic relationships where I do remember having that switch where it would happen and I wouldn't remember chunks of time, and he would say that I was a different person, and it was almost like someone that was trying to protect me in a sense, like
Mm-hmm.
someone that was able to like protect myself. So when you said that, I was like, I've never spoken about that. I mean, again, a lot of the stuff is coming up, so I've never really said that out loud.
Right, right. Have you heard of internal family systems theory?
I think so,
It's
but
with
tell me
Richard
about it.
Schwartz. Yeah. And what he suggests is that we develop these mechanisms. And I don't know if I'm going to recall the names properly, but there's like protectors, and
Mhm.
then there's also the kind of the reactors.
Mhm.
And he says that these are all integrated parts of ourselves that we do this as a mechanism of protection. For example, if you know that somebody is very abusive and critical, we may have an introjected piece of that critical person
Mhm.
inside of us and a way to hold ourselves accountable so that we don't actually get the rejection in real
Mm.
life.
Yeah, that makes sense because
Yeah.
my dad, he would tell me like some of the things that I would say to him when whatever that my coping mechanism would kick in. And it was
Mhm.
things that I was like, I would never tell you that. Because I was too afraid to tell him. And he was like saying like, yeah, we would have full on like I would get home and I'd be like, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
yeah, it's very, very,
It
very
sounds like
interesting.
you're really dissociating. That's what I
Hmm.
take from that, is that you were
Hmm.
having significant dissociation. I have had some too, not to the degree of like that, but we're definitely where I'm driving and down the road and I suddenly come to and realize, how did I get here? And it's really freaky when it happens. And it's all of it. It's part of the mind's ability to say, this is too much.
Yeah.
I'm just going to protect part of you by decreasing at least your awareness of this.
Yeah.
And allows the autonomic system to kind of step in and do those things and instinctively knows to do. But it does not feel good. It
No.
is a terrible feeling when it happens. So I am curious about how the abuse has impacted adult relationships.
I grew up in such a chaotic environment, and even down to the media and the art and the things that I was consuming, it was so normalized. And it was just something that was just chaos and confusion, and violence just was what I was used to. So every relationship that I had until I left my most recent ex in 2019, all of them were unhealthy in some shape or form,
Hmm.
abusive in some shape or form. My two most notable ones, my physically abusive ex, which I just passed my 10-year freedom anniversary from him. Yeah, it's been 10 years. It's so crazy that it's been that long. Some days it feels like it was yesterday, and other days it's like, oh, I forgot about that.
Right,
So,
right.
but yeah, I mean, and even down to the way that I didn't know how to advocate for myself when it comes to my medical situation, my relationships with my doctors, my relationships with how I interact with people, being too afraid to say something when something hurt my feelings or when I felt like I'm not being heard. Every single type of relationship that I had, they were all very similar. And after I left my narcissistic ex that I broke up with in 2019, I was like, I have to figure this out. Like, I'm attracted to these type of people, and I need to understand why. And I was dating the many different faces of my mom. I was in
Mm.
relationships with my mother. And once I was able to nail that down, it all made so much sense. And then I was able to then start working on repairing that relationship with myself. The validation really changed my life because, we get stuck in this incredibly difficult cycle to get out of abuse where the gaslighting is so much that you even begin to gaslight yourself.
Right.
And to have my trauma acknowledged, it being validated is simply kind of like what changed my life in general and saved my life was the validation portion.
You said two powerful things, and I want to circle to both of them because they're pivotal. One was, it's amazing how when you exist in gaslighting and exist in a falsehood that you don't even know how to advocate for yourself. You think things are so normal. I don't know how many times, Nia, that I would have something happen to me, or even like I was thinking of that last relationship, that it felt off and I didn't even know to question it because I'd gotten so used to things not adding up. Or
Mhm.
even when it came to my own care, I wouldn't think of the right follow-up questions, or I would wait way too long to even get help because I'd been used to not being able to seek help. So I didn't even know what was a reasonable baseline. So
Yeah.
it's amazing how having that kind of abuse causes a fuzziness in being able to be your best. And people just say, get better at self-care. Well, when you don't know what self-care looks like, how do
Yeah.
you do that?
Exactly.
It's very hard. And the other thing that you said that was so like hit me so hard was I realized the same thing, that when I was in that last relationship, do you ever seen that children's book, Are You My Mommy? I don't remember the name of
Yeah.
the author, but the bird, it's a bird, walks around essentially asking everything it meets under the sun. Are you my mommy? Are you my mommy? It comes up to a crane and asks that. It goes up to like a dog and asks that. I realized I had walked through my life asking everybody and everything, Are
Mm.
you my mommy? And then I had
Mm.
been putting adult people into that role,
Yeah.
hoping somehow I could fix what was now no longer fixable.
I think I tried to find a piece of maternal love in especially the women I had in my life, but I just was trying so hard to fill this void. I wanted to be loved so badly, but I didn't know what the true definition of love was. I just knew what I was told the definition of love was, and I just went with that. And the struggle love is not, it's a fallacy. And struggle love was something that was just so normalized in my life. And
Right,
so
right.
it manifested in so many different ways. I actually never really put myself first until I got diagnosed with my second brain condition, and I'm in the hospital for 10 days, and I literally don't have the energy, and I have no choice but to put myself first. Like, I literally have to figure out how to find the will to live, and I don't have the energy for anything else.
Right,
And that
right.
was the first time I really took that power back of, I can't give to anybody else. I have to give this to myself and not feel selfish about it. And once your life changes in the way that us, who deal with chronic illnesses, when that changes, your world becomes so much about how to survive. And that's something that's a testament that I've known my whole life, which has just been validated by my newest psychotherapist, is that all I've ever known is survival. I've never lived. When you're in survival mode and that's the only choice that you have, that,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, yeah, so you're in a good relationship now.
amazing.
How did you pull that off?
I love that question. Honestly, I really do. So after I left my ex, I was in psychotherapy and talk therapy twice a week for like a year and a half. And I really wanted to get to a place where I was able to, like, I made a commitment to myself. I said, my next relationship is going to be a healthy relationship. If we don't work out, it's just because we're just not right for each other. It just wasn't meant for us to be, but it's not going to be because I'm being abused. And
Mm.
so I did a lot of work. And during this time, I had had my first brain surgery. So I was really trying to figure out who I was again. I'm in what felt like a different body. I'm experiencing a different life. At this point, I'm getting my second chance at life. I consider my first brain surgery my rebirth.
Mm.
And I am figuring it all out. And so there was this point where I'd started getting back on dating apps again, and I'm still in therapy. And I was like, I'm just going to get my feet wet. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to take a break because I just kept finding people that just only wanted my body. They didn't want anything more than that. And I
Right,
was looking for connections and relationships and long term relationships. I didn't want to be a hookup girl anymore.
right.
And so I went on a 6 month sex cleanse, actually. I didn't have sex for 6 months. I wasn't having relationships with people, with men, like not men, because I'm pansexual. So I wasn't having romantic relationships with people. I was just building that relationship with myself, and I was still healing. And then COVID happened. And so everything's kind of shut down. And I was like, okay, well, I'm ready to have at least a little bit of intimacy, a little bit of a sex life, but I just had someone for that. And it's okay. I tell my clients that all the time, if that's what you feel like you need to do for yourself. But I also told him, I was like, listen, like, I'm looking for a relationship. I know you don't want one, but I'm looking for a relationship. So we can keep doing this for as long as we want. But like, if I find a relationship, and he was totally cool with it. And then I went on his 2 dates with this guy that I met on Bumble, and then he ghosted me. And I thought it was going so well, and I had a breakdown. And
Mhm.
because being ghosted, the silent treatment is such a trigger for me. And so then I was like, okay, I took a break. I went back to therapy, and I was like, I need to figure out why this is triggering me so much. It's only been 2 dates and they were great, but like, he literally ghosted me. And so like, I shouldn't be falling apart. And I just kept putting those pieces back together. And then I was like, okay, I know what it is that I want. I'm not settling for anything less than this. And talked to a few guys. And then my husband and I were talking back and forth. And then he was actually the last. I was like, this is the last date I'm going on. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I was like, but I need a break. I'm emotionally exhausted at this point. I want to take a step back. And he was my last date. And now we're
Wow.
married. And
Do you think you did anything different,
yeah.
like in the practical pieces of that relationship that essentially made it more likely to be successful, more healthy?
Yes, I sure did. So I didn't wait as long to say certain pieces about myself, especially about my sexuality. I think that was the biggest piece. I was pretty open about that. I think I told him about that. So we went on our first date, and then 17 hours later, we went on our second date. So, and it was like totally unplanned. And we laugh about it now because it was a joke. Like, the whole time we were joking, but like, we were just going with it. And then we'll have that side conversation. So it was funny, but But yeah, so our second date, I told him I was bisexual. And then my husband is white. So I was like, and it's during George Floyd, and there's just a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement going on. And I was
Right.
like, I need you to understand that you're on a date with someone who is an authentically Black woman. And you have to understand what comes with me being a Black woman. And then I told him at the time I identified as bisexual, and we had a really good conversation around it. And then within like the first week of us like going on dates and stuff, I set my boundaries immediately because I wanted to see if his words and his actions were going to align or
Right.
going to
Right.
align. And I told him, I said, listen, I don't do violent communication. I'm a nonviolent communicator. Like, I don't do yelling, screaming, calling each other out of each other's names. I don't do aggressive. I don't do any of that. If there is an issue that presents itself and we can't talk to each other like how we're talking to each other right now, this is not going to be the relationship for me. And one, I wanted to see what he's going to say.
Right.
And
Right.
two, I wanted to see if his actions were going to match what he said.
Right.
And it was so funny because he like pauses and he was like, "Is that it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do I sign something? Like, or like, what do I do? Because I'm so down for that. Like, I want that because he had similar relationships where there was a lot of violent communication. But I did slowly open up to him about my past trauma. That wasn't something that I was so forthcoming about.
Right. Right.
Same
Right.
thing with my medical condition. That wasn't something I was so forthcoming about. I slowly opened up about it. And like, if it wasn't him being just the amazing man that he is, I really would have scared him off. We just had this conversation a couple of months ago because I literally have no sense of time. My sense of time doesn't make sense. And in my mind, literally on like a week and a half or almost like 2 weeks of us dating, I was like, so what are we doing? And in my mind, we'd been going out, for 3 months. It was like,
Right.
so I have no concept of time. He's like, that's when I really understood what your medical situation was like. Because it did scare me at first because I was like, is she like pressing me right now? Like, I don't know. Like, is she putting pressure on me? He literally had to take out a calendar and show me our first date and the date that it was. And I was like, oh. But yeah, I was just so glad that like I didn't scare him off because it did scare him. And then I just like slowly started opening up more about my trauma because I'd gotten into grad school at that time and he didn't understand why I was so emotional about it. And I told him why I was so emotional about it because of my undergrad experience in the last 2 years and when I was in a relationship with my physically abusive ex and I had to flee and all of this stuff. And then my grades really reflected that I was in an abusive relationship. So
Right.
this was my second chance. And so I did a lot of things differently and it's been successful. We've never gotten into an argument. We've never had a scream match. We've never called each other out. And we don't even really have disagreements either. Like
You
it's
know what I
crazy.
you know what I noticed as I'm listening to you? I've noticed that there was an authenticity to you. Like a lot of victims get into this fear mode to saying, I just can't show up at all. They're not authentic. They're not transparent. So you pretty quickly said, this is me,
Yeah.
take it or leave it. But the
Yeah.
other thing that you did was you also not only set boundaries and watched what he was going to do with them, but then you moved slowly into your growing intimacy.
Yeah.
Even though there was a transparency of this is me, it didn't mean that you did too much overexposing. You let that grow naturally as part of the relationship, which I heard that it was such a synchronicity between the two of you that it happened super fast. So it felt like really deep, pretty fast, but yet it was measured. So which really is a wise thing and a thing that's hard because we tend to do like a pendulum. We're either way too much trauma dumping, oversharing, reenacting our trauma, or we end up being so guarded they can't even get to know us because we're afraid to let anybody know anything about us, which is really fascinating. So thank you for sharing that with us. What I'd
Yeah.
like to do, because this has been, I could talk to you for hours, Nia, and we have so much we could go on, but I want to jump over to the podcast extra and talk about back to this children thing, because
Yeah.
I think this is a thing that a lot of people who may be listening may not know. Often I have a feeling that many listeners are in a relationship with somebody, there's kids, and they wonder, how are kids doing? Are they surviving okay? And you and I just said it was really hard to pick up. So I'd like to go jump over there and talk about what are the signs that parents could be watching for that might be better indicators that your child is not doing as well as you think they are. But thank you so much for this. Where can people find you?
People can find me at my website, howtoloveabatteredwoman.com. And you can find me on social media at howtoloveabatteredwoman.
Okay, fantastic. And thank you so much for this. It was really amazing.
Thank
I
you, Karen.
deeply, deeply appreciate it. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Find me at Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. And whether you're in, consider leaving, or have left a narcissistic relationship, find community support at my Toxic Free Relationship Club. You can learn about this resource as well as others at kerrymcavoyphd.com. Now you don't need to wait a week to get your next podcast fix. Join Breaking Free from Narc Abuse at substack.com to get exclusive audio content for subscribers. To sign up, click the link in the show notes. And I'll see you back here next week.